Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'll be talking about changing urban systems. So let's start by defining a few key terms. So number one, urbanization. So this means an increase in the proportion of people living in towns and cities. So an area becoming more urban. Urban growth. This means an increase in the size of a particular settlement or an increase in the number of people living in urban centers. Urban sprawl. This means the unplanned, uncontrolled physical expansion of an urban area into the surrounding countryside. It is closely linked to the processes of suburbanization, which I will get to later. Counter-urbanization. This means the movement of population away from inner urban areas to a new town, new estate, a commuter town, or a village on the edge or beyond the city limits. A brownfield site. So this is an abandoned, derelict, or underused industrial buildings and land that may be contaminated but have the potential for redevelopment. So what I mean by derelict is that it's worn down. Yeah. Suburb. So this is a residential area within or just outside the boundaries of a city. Okay, ecological footprint. This is a really important one. This is the theoretical measurement of the amount of land and water a population requires to produce the resources it consumes and to absorb its waste under prevailing technology. Suburbanization. So this is the outward growth of towns and cities to engulf surrounding villages and rural areas. This may result from the outmigration of population from the inner urban area to the suburbs or from inward rural urban movements. Okay, now let's talk about urbanization in general, natural increases, and centripetal movements. So, the proportion of a nation's inhabitants relocating to urban areas is on the rise, currently. Urbanization rates is more economically, in more economically developed countries, have been, slowing down recently. This declaration can be attributed in part to enhanced living standards in rural regions, the implementation of effective public transport systems, and the surge in private vehicle ownership. So consequently, urban decay has emerged as a phenomenon, so characterized by the abandoned dereliction of urban spaces, decreased demand for inner city land, and the proliferation of graffiti in public areas, among other issues. So let's talk about things that urbanization results from. So number one is migration to urban areas, so rural to urban migration. This is quite simple. And number two is high birth rates due to youthful population resulting in positive natural increase when the birth rate exceeds the death rate. That's what I'm talking about. And so the dominant population movements in urban areas are centripetal movements and centrifugal movements. So what I mean by centripetal is you're going inwards, you're going in, you're going to the center, you're pedaling into the center is what I always remember it as. So this is rural-urban migration, gentrification, and re-urbanization, which essentially is also urban renewal. And number two is centrifugal, so this means to go out, so outward movement, which includes suburbanization, counter-urbanization, and urban sprawl. So this is, you're leaving the center, but for centripetal, you're going to the center. So you could see from this graph I put here, the rural-urban migration in China. So you could see the rural population drastically declining while the urban population is drastically increasing. Okay, so this movement of people from rural to urban areas is caused by urban pull and rural push factors. So urban pull factors that attract people from villages to cities. So this is a good thing. So they include better housing, improved sanitation, perceived job prospects, and bright light syndrome in urban areas. So, and rural push is the difficulties people face in rural areas, which compels them to move to the city. So this includes poor housing, poor sanitation, decline in farming, lack of educational opportunities, lack in jobs, lack of social amenities, poverty, and generally poor level of infrastructural development. Okay, and now let's talk about gentrification, which I've said quite a few times. So this is the process whereby middle class or high income people move into inner cities to buy derelict buildings and redevelop them into high class residential areas. So it also has an economic dimension, so in which the houses under dereliction are renovated to generate economic activities in the area. So young married professionals may begin to move to gentrified areas, thereby changing their population structure and demographics. So take like a post-industrialized city for an example. So Detroit's a really good example that I made a video about, and you could go watch that. But that's more like deindustrialization. It's not really gentrification. So gentrification, they would take those areas and they would make it all fancy, all new. They would add like art museums, the fancy restaurants, and it would essentially displace the people that used to live there. Yeah, exactly. I wrote that gentrification areas can lead to the social displacement of poor people as the gentrified areas become too expensive for the poor people to be able to afford. So example of this is, I have Ghana here. So there were houses built in the cantonments in Ghana during the period of colonialism. So these houses have been old and worn down. So the Ghanaian government sold them to affluent citizens who transformed those houses into luxurious apartments. So people who used to live in the cantonments might have been displaced because these luxurious apartments were built. As you can see from the picture, this is an actual picture. So number 2 is gentrification in Sochon village in South Korea. So the village is going through a transformation right now where there's a rise in tourists, and this triggers like commercial vitalization of Sochon village. So because they're getting so much tourist traction from here, they're like buying these old houses, these old traditional Korean houses, and making them into cafes, boutiques, salons, restaurants, and every kind of tourist service. So because of this, because it's getting popular, this popular urban district essentially kicks out old residents and tenants. Okay, now let's look at re-urbanization right here. So it is the process of revitalizing urban areas and the movement of people from the outskirts of cities into these places. So, however, it may involve government policies that are meant to improve the living conditions in such spaces, which may involve the injection of capital to revitalize the dilapidated area. So again, this also includes the process of gentrification. Just because urban renewal is happening, it doesn't mean that it's getting gentrified. Because urban renewal, essentially, you want to rehabilitate the place. You want to make it a bit better for the people to live. Well, gentrification is more like, oh, look, these young professionals, these rich residents are buying these old houses, displacing people. Urban renewal can be more beneficial than gentrification itself. Yes, exactly. I wrote here, gentrification is done by private businessmen, but reurbanization is done by the government. So it's really different. When you have urban renewal, you can have gentrification, but it can overlap, but it can be different as well. So you could see an example in the London Olympics in 2012, where East London was absolutely socially deprived, and the government took that initiative to build a stadium there and revitalize some of the services there, so it would gain tourist traction. So that's one example. Okay, now let's talk about centrifugal movements. So movements outside the city. So number 1, we have suburbanization. So this is the movement of people, industries, or shops from inner cities to live in areas outside the city. So it is the opposite of gentrification, in fact. And it occurred mainly in the USA, UK, and Australia around the early 20th century. It was made possible by the improvement of, transportation networks. Because you have private cars, you have trams, you have railways, they can live in, the outskirts of the city and still go to their jobs, still go to school, and still go shopping. And it was also possible due to the decline in the price of farmlands, coupled with rising wages and high standards of living, necessitating private housing. So the second one I have here is counter-urbanization. So this is the movement of people away from inner urban areas to a new town, new estate, a commuter town, or a village on the edge or just beyond the city limits, as I've said before. It is also referred to as de-urbanization. So you're like de-urbaning yourself. That makes the most sense. But so there's reasons for counter-urbanization. So this is like the high prices of land in urban areas. If you've seen my previous video on the urban environments unit, you would have seen that, as you go closer to the central business district, as you go closer to where, all the things happen in a city, the land values go up, they rise because it's more significant, it's more important there. But as you go away from the CBD, as you go away from these really vital services and all these, fancy things, it gets cheaper because you're not situating yourself in such a populous area. And number 2, congestion pollution, high crime rate. 3, lack of community spiritedness. And 4, declining services. So when I talk about number 2, congestion, pollution, high crime rates, when you're in a city, you're most likely to breathe in more like polluted air, of course, because there's like industries, there's cars everywhere, there's people everywhere, there's shops everywhere. You would expect to be sucking up carbon dioxide a lot. And there will be high crime rates as well because, low income and middle income households may be situated in cities because they don't have the ability to buy residential homes, because they don't have the ability to purchase private vehicles and use public transportation in a continuous manner. So, yeah. And urban sprawl. So this is the uncontrolled and unplanned physical expansion of an urban area. So it's closely linked to the process of suburbanization, where people just move out to live in the residential areas. So people living in sprawled neighborhoods drive daily to the CBD to work, as I've said before, and they would, use that service. It's just more beneficial to them. So they are characterized by low density in housing. So if you look at cities, like if you look at New York City, for example, it is so dense. There's so many apartment buildings. And if you look at Hong Kong, for example, their buildings, their apartment complexes are really dense as well, because they want to try to fit as much as they can in the most important place, in the center. And number 2, large lawns. I'm pretty sure I was going to write lawns, like gardens. And number 3, wide streets. And number 4, landscaping. Yeah, so exactly, like many large cities like London, New York, and Tokyo, if you're in the center, it's really urban there. There's only high buildings, what were those called again? Skyscrapers, and malls and all those services that you would not really use daily. But if you go outer, like if you go to the outskirts of that center, you start to see more houses, you start to see more homes. So that's what I'm referring to. Okay, now let's talk about urban systems growth. So a city can be referred to as a system, of course, because it consists of inputs, process, and outputs. So the input in the city refers to the various resources, both human and physical, that the city needs to function effectively. So that's like human beings, food resources, oil, fuel, energy, water, solar, and knowledge, investment, electricity, and food. As these inputs enter the city, they undergo various processes, including manufacturing, industrial processes, and urban infrastructural processes. So the more inputs you have, the greater your city will become. So the processes would lead to the production of outputs, right? Some of which could be positive and negative. Positive outputs may include manufactured goods, and negative outputs may be pollution and waste production as a result of these inputs. Okay, now let's talk about urban infrastructure improvement. So in most urban areas, especially in developing countries, cities continue to grow at a faster rate than the ability of these cities' authorities to provide the needed infrastructure. So such cities begin to face many challenges such as traffic congestion, the shortage of services such as water, schools, electricity, and there is therefore the need for urban areas to undergo improvement to meet the demands for the growing urban population. So things that may need to be improved is like transportation, sanitation, water, waste disposal, and telecommunications. Okay, all good. So now let's look at Shanghai for an example, which is a China infrastructural growth case study that I have. It's really mini. So the city of Shanghai has grown at a rate of 10% per year since 1992 and is currently sitting at 26.32 million, like the population. But if you keep up with the news, you know that their population is declining. But still, their population is quite high. And Shanghai is supposed to be turned into an international economic hub, which I feel like it already is. And the central business district is called Pudong, and Pudong is used for finance, trade, retailing, recreation, tourism, media, information services, and businesses. So basically, name every industry, it's probably there. So now let's look at the transportation infrastructure in Shanghai. So they have a lot of railway systems, but they have a lot of traffic as well, and they have a lot of ports because it's located near water. Because I think the Chinese letters for Shanghai was like has to do with something with the sea, so I'm pretty sure that's like a yeah, okay. So it's near the sea and it has railroads and it has bus lines. So it's a really convenient place to live, essentially, I think. Because there's so many there's myriad of options, to travel with. You could travel with a boat, you could travel with a car, you could travel with a bus, you could travel with a train. And access to water and sanitation. So the Huangpu River and the Yangtze River are the main surface water sources for Shanghai's water supply. So the proportion of populations with access to piped water rose from 40% in 1990 to nearly 95% in 2007. And by the time that it's 2024 now, I'm pretty sure it's a bit more than that. Okay. Now let's look at the waste treatment. So Okay. So as the population of Shanghai increases, the amount of rubbish found in landfill sites is also drastically increasing. So this is kind of a environmental problem now. And the demand for incinerators is increasing here more than any part of the world. I think that's a given how there's 26 million people living here. And yeah. Okay, now let's talk about access to telecommunications. So that's like basically your basic technology services like 4G, 5G, and those gigaplans. Okay, so Shanghai was one of the first centers in China to develop telecommunication services. So in 1971, an underwater telegraph cable was laid between Hong Kong and Shanghai. In 1907, a local telephone service was introduced, followed by long distance in 1923. Okay. Yes. Because they have such a strong technology base, they really need one to attract FDI, foreign investment from multinational companies, to keep that, CBD going. Okay, now let's talk about causes of urban deindustrialization. You should look at my Detroit video, but I'll explain factors of it instead of going through a specific country. Okay, so deindustrialization, opposite of industrialization. And industrialization, you all know the Industrial Revolution, right? Industrialization occurred in Western countries around the 1800s, and today it is rapidly in emerging countries. So the BRICS, so Brazil, Russia, India, China. So on the other hand, deindustrialization is rapidly taking place in advanced countries. So for instance, UK, USA, Germany, and Japan, perhaps. The causes of these declines can be broadly explained in 5 main categories right here. Okay, so you could take a look here. So globalization. This has led to the widespread of migration of manufacturing sectors of the advanced countries to areas where they find a competitive advantage in terms of raw materials, labor market for their produce, and relaxed environmental laws. For example, Apple designs its products in California but manufactures its final product in China. So this is an example of offshoring. So like they'll be like, hey, I'll just design it here, but I don't really want to make it here because I have no space. So let me just ask another country to do it since it's also cheaper. It's basically like that. So this is due to the advantage of cheap labor in China and relaxed environmental laws. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is why, it's deindustrialization, because they're not really making their own industries. They're more going with the entrepreneur way. And decline in demand for manufactured goods. So this is like buying CDs. Like you don't buy CDs anymore. I mean, some people might still buy CDs, but you would usually use Apple Music or Spotify, but mainly Spotify. And automation and upskilling of workers. So automation is a process whereby machines or robots or artificial intelligence replace human labor in most manufacturing functions. So that's basically what HICs are like these days. I don't know if you've seen those videos on YouTube with Japan, like Japanese factories, they have like robots working instead of humans. So it's basically like that. They don't need these people anymore. They don't need these blue collar workers. They only need like AI. Like only like those like roboticians, engineers, and those people. Yeah, because there's a reduction in the size of the company or a physical relocation to maximize profit. And yeah, like examples like car manufacturing industries. You could take a look at it for the one in my Detroit video. Oops. Okay. So political changes. So this leads to deindustrialization when government policy changes. So for example, the introduction of free trade policies, so that means to remove trade barriers like tariffs and quotas, led to many manufacturing industries becoming exposed to international competition, such that they were not able to survive. So, or the existing industries may be relocated to areas where the cost of production is low. Okay. Now, tertiarization. So this is when a country's manufacturing industries are replaced by the tertiary industry. So this includes like telecommunications, electronics industry, law firms, accountancy firms, education, nursing, banking, social services, teaching, and more. So this is basically the movement of blue-collar workers, blue-collar jobs to white-collar jobs. This has led to deindustrialization in old industrial cities as a result of the decline in manufacturing sectors. So blue-collar workers are people that, would use physical labor, while white-collar workers would, typically just sit on a desk, probably do whatever they want. No, that's not true. Just, working in a professional setting. Okay, so now let's look at consequences of deindustrialization. Oh my goodness. Okay, so positive consequences. So first is urban renewal. So the city will find itself redeveloping itself to overcome the challenges of deindustrialization. Innovative architecture. This means that city authorities find a way to utilize these brown sites to regenerate the areas. Basically the Olympics for Stratford Park in the UK. I was talking about that earlier. And low energy usage and environmental sustainability. Introductions of modern forms of technology. But the negative consequences, there's like more. Increase in unemployment because it affects the low-skilled workers since they are less likely to find jobs now. They only require like high-skilled jobs. So income inequality because most of the people who will be unemployed would have less money than the employed. The rich may get richer and the poor may get poorer. It's basically that. And then the decline in the variety of commodities and manufactured products and the decline in the service provision in urban areas lead to the out migration of people because they're like, oh, this place is so bad, I don't want to live here anymore, and they just leave. And increase in crime levels and widen the gender gap. Okay, that is it for my video today. Thank you for watching.